Hampton City Council. I'd like to recognize some of the dignitaries in our audience this evening. First of all, Congressman Bobby Scott. Hampton City Councilman Will Moffitt. Hampton City Councilman Jimmy Gray. Former Hampton Mayor George Wallace. I want to say, first of all, that I want to commend Calvin Pearson and all the members of Project 1619. I can't say that I've been to every one of the events that he's held in the last 10 years, but it takes an amazing amount, first of all, of vision, as well as fortitude, to kind of step out and, first of all, change the historical beliefs about where the first Africans arrived here in English North America. The history books, and for the longest time we were told that it was Jamestown. Well, Calvin, through his research, determined that it was here. Old Point Comfort, Fort Monroe, Hampton, Virginia, whatever name you want to call it by, but it wasn't Jamestown, it's Hampton. And so we should be commended for that. And then secondly, for the fact that he's done a lot of this, and Project 1619 has done a lot of this without the type of funding that you would think an undertaking of this kind would warrant and would receive. And so for year in, year out, to try and bring in entertainment from, I think it's Texas, where the gentleman comes from who plays the, Mississippi. That's a big difference between Texas and Mississippi, but all right, I stand corrected. But even to bring in delegates from the African Embassy coming down from DC, and so we got Cameroon representatives and different folks, and dancers. I mean, I think it was 2 years ago, there was this spectacular dance group that came down from Richmond, Virginia. So again, I want to commend them. And City Council supports this. We've been trying to build a group around and support. We haven't always done all we should do, but the fact is that you're here tonight. I think it's going to be a great, great film and panel discussion. Tomorrow there are more activities, and so I would hope that tonight, from what you see, that you'd be inclined to go out and tell somebody that, hey, greater things are yet to come, so come out tomorrow and participate. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, for those kind remarks. So what do we want you to do? We want you to sit back and look at the movie and think about the situations that we're going through today. And the movie is really going to illustrate things that we've gone through for the past 65 years. After the movie is over with, we've got two of our renowned professors, doctors. We got Dr. Bill Wiggins, we've got Dr. Howard King, who's going to do a panel discussion, answer some of your questions. So think about what you want to ask. And we're going to do about a 45-minute panel discussion as soon as the movie is over with. So sit back, enjoy the movie.
One day we will all be history. I remind individuals, this microphone has a history too. When I'm finished with it, you'll see that the history was I spoke and passed it to Dr. Howard King. Just a word or two about myself. I'll be as brief as possible. This whole American dilemma, American denial piece is very sensitive to me. It makes me sad because I've lived a whole lot of it. Just for reference, not that you care, I'm an ancient yet, but I was born in North Carolina on the St. Augustine College campus because it was one of two places I could be born. Otherwise I needed a midwife. So that was always something that I remembered. And I still have two birth dates because it didn't matter if my birthday was recorded accurately. I can go further by indicating that I did march once in 1962 with CORE. I attended a segregated school for a while in Cary, North Carolina. Watched my uncle, my aunts, and other relatives being treated in disrespectful manners. And the young lady who went to Princeton University struck a nerve because that is where I did my graduate work. And I finished up there, I left there in 1973 before going to the University of Connecticut. Yet she was speaking about the 1990s. Let me just say that there are lots of good people at Princeton University, but it only takes one or two to make your experience a very bad one. You saw a picture of Old Nassau Hall. That was what was shown at Princeton University. A couple more things about myself for what it's worth so that you can understand why I say what I do say. I'm trying to be very objective, but the subjective reality of human nature sometimes slips in. But I will try to be objective and open-minded, though it is difficult to do so. Again, I was trained as a historian who has focused upon social movements, psychohistory, that's why this is so close to me as well. The history of race, protest, and violence, interdisciplinary history, and I spent some time studying Russian history. And not being boastful at all, but I spent time with Kenneth Clark, the man who, along with Mamie Clark, did doll studies. He was at the Metropolitan Applied Research Center when I was doing my research, and when I was at Columbia University as a dean, a member of the history department before coming to Hampton University. I also spent time with Dr. John Hope Franklin, who studies at the African American History and Cultural Museum in Washington, D.C. Also spent time with Jack Greenberg, the fellow who worked in the Brown case. And I do have to say this, there were a combination of cases wrapped up, as you saw in the film, the Brown case, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. The whole movement to desegregate schools and show that segregation led to unequal education started in Georgia. It started in Georgia. I want you to keep that in mind. And it worked its way up so that Linda Brown's case was the lead case. Again, Jack Greenberg passed away last October. He was one of the deans along with me at Columbia University. Also, I want you all to keep in mind that others who have focused upon Gunnar Myrdal's work, quotes around Gunnar Myrdal's work, and I'll tell you why, I'm not being negative, included a review by Ralph Ellison, who I got to spend time with at Columbia University, author of Invisible Man, etc. And if you really want to see a very balanced overview in a review of American Dilemma, seek that one which was reviewed by Ralph Ellison in 1944. Another great man, and I was humbled to be in the presence of all of those individuals. American Dilemma, the book is 2 volumes. You need to know that. And one thing that troubles me is they never seem to focus upon the information after the colon. It's An American Dilemma. This is the title, the full title. An American Dilemma, The Negro Problem and Modern Democracy. That's the full title. You notice you didn't see it? But that's the full title of that 2-volume work. I also want to stress here, nothing meant to be negative, there were over 50 African American scholars who worked with him, including Du Bois. Did you see Du Bois in the film?
Yeah.
He was standing there with Beauregard Du Bois.
I saw
E. Franklin Frazier. I can go on and mention there were women there as well. Ralph Bunche, of course, he and Gunnar Myrdal had their smoking issues in common. I think they hastened their illnesses by smoking themselves to death. You saw he always had a cigarette, so did Ralph Bunche. So did Langston Hughes, for that matter. Chain smokers put one out, started smoking another one. I like to humanize history. I want you to see the full context of it. As for me, I would put quotes around the word democracy. America is not a democracy. I don't want to upset anyone. America is a republic, right? Representatives who represent us, and we send them out to do various things. If it was a true democracy, one person would vote. You know what the result would have been, so I'm leaving that alone. All right? I'm not getting into that. I'm not here to be political. Again, democracy comes from the Greek word demos, meaning people, and kratia, meaning power. So it's people power. Let's look at it that way. And there's one thing that I want everyone to be mindful of tonight before I stop speaking here and pass the mic to my colleague, psychologist Dr. Howard King, is that there is a red herring out there that's smelling right now, and I'm not going to be taken in by it. I hope that Representative Bobby Scott will forgive me for focusing my thoughts along his thoughts, and that is that these are good thoughts. We're not going to be misled by what's going on right now. We have to remember the health care bill, budgets, economic situations as well. The smokescreen that's out there to divert individuals is very real, but don't be misled. You have to do all of these things at the same time. It's a balancing act. Don't lose sight of race. That's what we're talking about. You can't lose sight of that. That's a reality. I've lived it, and I'm living it. And we see what's going on in the country right now. And that's why I'm so sad at the same time that I know that I need to speak about it. And so let's hope that everyone gets a handle on their behavior. The other thing I want us to keep in mind is that there is a clear gap between ideology and reality. You know what the Declaration of Independence says. You know what the Constitution focuses upon. We know we've had many amendments to the Constitution, including the eradication of enslavement, and the conferring of citizenship, and then the 15th Amendment, the right to vote. And then we had the voting rights movement, and now history is cyclical. We keep going around and around. It doesn't repeat itself exactly, but what else is new under the sun, as Solomon said? It isn't. It's very similar. So I'm reliving some of the same emotions, some of the same feelings. I've looked at the Civil War pretty closely. James McPherson was my advisor at Princeton. He is the premier historian of the Civil War, though I didn't focus on it in the way he wanted me to. I looked at other things. And I have met many individuals who think that they are going to, quote, take back their country. And I'm saying to myself, well, Native American Indians were here 12,000 plus years before the Jamestown Bunch. I say that, thank you. I say that jokingly, but seriously, before 1607. Yes. And then there are those who want to send me back to Africa, although part of me has to go to England probably, and another part probably has to go to Ireland. I'm all mixed up. I know that. I got them all in the woodpile. Send it to Bilbo, you know, back to Africa, send them away, or sterilize them. I would say at this point. In the 1970s and 80s, you may not be aware, but there was the use of Depo-Provera. You've heard of that? Where African American women, unbeknownst to themselves, in many instances, were sterilized in hospitals after childbirth. And there were lawsuits. So it wasn't too far-fetched from what individuals were saying before. Let's just look at the sad reality of things, and it pains me to have to look at that. America has failed to live up to what? Its ideology, that all men are created, and women, what, free, equal, etc. It's jargon if you don't act upon it. It makes no sense at all, and troubles me greatly that we're living a lie. We think that we have truly embraced the American creed, which means what? Liberty, opportunity, equality. It's just lip service in many instances. I'm not going to make excuses for individuals who behave in various ways. That's not what I'm here to do. But I do have to state that I've had to deal with and still deal with the color of my skin. I see it every day. It doesn't matter how good I might be at something. And again, I'm not ancient, but my generation is the John Carlos generation. We ran with and against each other. Mexico City, you've been to the museum, John Carlos, my buddy. Vinnie Matthews, 1976, got kicked out of the Olympic Village. I wasn't quite fast enough to make the Olympic team, I didn't think, but at any rate, I was hanging out there. So I'm going to turn it over to Brother Dr. Howard King. And we want to field as many questions as you have. And again, the mind is an interesting entity. Again, when you look at psychohistory, And I have looked at that with individuals, and the human being is very complex. You feel one way one moment, and another way the next, am I correct? And I just can't in any way say that this is the way someone is. So we'll move forward, and hope I haven't talked too long. Forgive me if I have, but I just wanted to give you context. And the last thing I'll say is that this whole racial piece that you see happening here, which should not overshadow the other things that we have to do, that whole piece goes way back. It goes back to the pseudoscience of the 19th century, the mudsill theory, Dysesthesia aethiopica, saying that Negroes had, quotes around the word Negroes, diseases peculiar to them. It's just amazing that all of these things existed, and they measured the skull by determining how many marbles could be put in that skull, determined how intelligent you were. And you have all this talk about the party of Lincoln. That's fine, I'm a historian. The party of Lincoln went out of existence pretty much by the time Grant got into office, after the assassination of Lincoln, the arrival of Andrew Johnson, and then of course Ulysses S. Grant. And then the South was turned loose, if you will, with the Compromise of 1877 to get Rutherford, called Rutherford B. Hayes, elected. And so then you had the redevelopment, or the growth once again, of Jim Crow in no uncertain terms. Turn of the century, the lynching bees, you saw the Chicago, the East St. Louis riot, and I studied with L.A. Grudwick, who's a premier scholar, sociologist who focused upon East Riot at East St. Louis. The lynching bees, we haven't even begun to look at those things. And you just see a pattern that goes on and on and on. So it has a very long history from the time that you had the triculture that developed Native American Indians here, European Americans, and then Africans. And that's what we're focusing on as well right now. The arrival in on August 25th, 1619, of the first Africans to English North America. Thank you for bearing with me. There's so much more I want to say, but my wife is here, and I think I should be quiet.
Very short. I have someone on stage who can speak for a long time, so I'm going to I'm going to start by saying I had to be talked into being on stage this evening, because those of you who know me know that I'm a quiet introvert. And taking the stage is not something I'm comfortable with. But I agreed to do it this evening for a couple of reasons. One is that I feel that I may have some perspective to share that could be useful to hear. And secondly, I have some experience. And I'll just mention that real quickly. I'm a native of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, so I'm a northerner. But as a young child, I had the opportunity to spend my summers on the eastern shore of Maryland back in the 1950s, and worked on the farm with my cousin, and had the opportunity to realize that if I was going to get somewhere in life, I was going to have to get off the farm. I remember clearly picking beans, cucumbers, tomatoes, and other produce, and seeing what were then called Florida camp folks working in the field next to me, and seeing what I remember to be depressing situations where I saw the entire family working in the fields in what I call abject poverty. So I realized then that I needed to get an education. At that time, too, I also had the opportunity in 1954, while the public schools in Philadelphia had not started, they had begun in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And I had the opportunity to ride on the bus the first day of integration in the South. So I consider that a distinction. The other thing I want to say that might help with some perspective is that I'm sure all of us are familiar with what has happened over the past week in Charlottesville. And I just want to mention that back in the mid and late 70s, I was a student at the University of Virginia. And I experienced what Charlottesville was like at that time. I also happened to be I was admitted to the University of Virginia, I'm sure, as a result of affirmative action. And my first day on campus, the director of the community psychology department came to me and told me that I didn't belong at the university. For quite a while, I pretty much understood what was going on, and I would just say, to bring a long story kind of to a close, that I got through the University of Virginia and obtained my PhD, one, because of affirmative action, and two, as a result of the grace of God. While I was there, I also learned that I was the first African American in 1979 to obtain a PhD degree from the University of Virginia in psychology. And I'm not saying that to brag, I'm saying that because that's a sad commentary on the history of major universities in the United States. 1979, I was number one. There was another individual who by arrangement got a degree from the School of Education earlier than that, but not from the Department of Psychology. While I was at the University of Virginia, you can imagine some of the things that I experienced based on what I've already mentioned. And so I would just say at this point that things changed dramatically at the University of Virginia after I left. And I think based on the statistics that I'm reading in the paper now, that 6% of the population, student population at the University of Virginia is African American, and it was considerably higher a few years ago. I would just have to say I'm not sure what's going on there right now. So with that, I would also just end by saying my background is psychology. And so I might be able to say something from the psychological perspective as it pertains to questions that someone might have. Thank you.
So Rochelle, if you will entertain questions if there are any.
We would like to thank Dr. Bill Wiggins and Dr. Howard King for their comments on American denial. And I can't wait, Bill, to review the essay that Ralph Ellison did on American Dilemma. And I hope, and historians, you can point out what I'm going to say. Didn't they say that on his desk was the Declaration of Independence and then a quote by Abraham Lincoln on how bad it was to be silent? And then I'm thinking, and I'm saying to the historians, Gunnar needed to have done some more research, because if he's going to hold Abraham Lincoln up as a liberator and emancipator, he needs to go back and do some research on Abraham Lincoln's history. And yeah, because what I'm finding out is that if Abraham Lincoln could have won the war and kept slavery, he would have done it. So Gunnar needs to do, to me, notice I said to me, Gunnar needs to do a little bit more research on African American Civil War history too. Well, now it's open to, and Dr. King, I also went to UVA too. And I did meet Ralph Ellison at UVA. Okay.
May I say something before the questions? I'm not here to defend Abraham Lincoln, but I'm here to look at a person who suffered really from cognitive dissonance. He had some serious issues, approach avoidance, And yes, he acted in racist ways, especially out in Cincinnati when he said he preferred if there was a position of superior and inferior, he would have whites occupy the superior position. He did do something that started to be close to kind of a 180. He did support colonization.
Yes.
He was confused, there's no question about it, and I'm ambivalent about it. But he strikes me as being very similar, ultimately, in terms of being ethical and moralistic, ultimately. And the whole Civil War thing about enslavement was that the Founding Fathers, quote unquote, around Founding Fathers, they did not want enslavement to go beyond where they had established it. That was Lincoln's whole position, pretty much. He would have continued to have enslavement, yes. But to take the stance he did take to push the 13th Amendment, I have to give him some credit for that. There's no question about that. Very, very ambivalent am I about that, but we do have to look at both sides of him, let's put it that way, both sides. And I will add that based upon Joel Rogers' research, he was one of our so-called 5 Negro presidents.
Right.
As in that if you have one drop of Negro blood, the quantum blood,
Yeah.
you messed up.
Yes.
I didn't mean that. That means that
Yes.
you know what I'm saying, you automatically
Right.
African. So I understand what you're right on there, yes. But it's kind of like Benjamin Franklin Butler, the fellow who didn't sit back, Shepard Mallory, Charles King Mallory Street, the slaver, Shepard Mallory, Frank Baker, James Townsend. Again, Benjamin Franklin Butler did a 180. He became a radical Republican. He did wonderful things. I like that man. I didn't really care for him earlier because he wasn't quite right, but he got right. I know I shouldn't have gone on with that, but once you start, I got to add the pieces. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay. All right. The floor is now open for questions from the audience. So once I see the first hand, I will give the mic.
I'd like to also add that I came up in a segregated society here in Virginia with parents with minimal education, and I guess low income, even though my father worked at a shipyard, it was low. However, I had teachers who constantly said to us, you have to be better than the white kids to make it in society. We don't have blacks or whites telling our children that today. So I want to know what we as a community, what organization, what vehicles do we have to reach our disenfranchised population in America?
I'm going to answer that question in a reverse order by saying first, I don't know. Secondly, I'm going to say that my interest based on one, growing up in, as I mentioned, Philadelphia, in inner city Philadelphia, where I had poor education from the 1st to the 5th grades, but better education later when my parents moved to a white neighborhood, and you know the rest of the story. I'll respond to that by saying also that since I retired about 5 years ago, I've worked in the mental health setting, and I supervise counselors who go out in the inner city areas, downtown Newport News, Norfolk, etc. And I work with them consistently. A problem that is apparent in almost every situation is that the children and adults they work with have little or no motivation to do anything positive or constructive. I feel really bad saying that, but that's what I have learned. So a big question becomes, how do you motivate the unmotivated? That's a very, very difficult question. How do you give people hope who don't have much hope and are basically satisfied with what the government is doing for them? It's a very, very difficult question. Very difficult to answer, especially for those of us who, while we may have grown up poor, or we may have grown up without much, we almost always had parents who instilled in us the idea that if you get an education, you can achieve, you can succeed. If you work hard, you can get there. It's easy for us to say that, those of us who have achieved, but to try to input that on people who are living in poverty and who have very little, if any, hope, poor, terrible role models, 14-year-old mothers raising children. It's a hard question. So to answer that, I already mentioned, I don't know the answer. And I don't know if the answer is anything other than we've got to just figure out how to get people motivated and how to work together.
If I could respond very briefly, I too am a product of the inner city, raised in the South Bronx, Brooklyn, Harlem, Bedford-Stuyvesant. I didn't get into all of that, the gangs, etc. I spoke to Arturo Lindsay on my way back from the West Coast this past Sunday as we drove along 64, passing Charlottesville and seeing all the state troopers and so on, and concerning ourselves with snipers or whatever. My friend Arturo Lindsay, who was the chair of the art department at Spelman, we went to high school together. He asked me if I remembered my experience at East New York High School in terms of preparation for college and encouragement. And the guidance counselor, Mrs. Gillespie, never called down any African Americans or Hispanic Americans to her office to encourage them to seek the college education. And he went to the principal and said, "Why is that, Mr. Walden? Why aren't they doing that?" And nothing much was said about the PSATs or the SATs. So the school system has something to do with it in many areas. There's not the encouragement. You also have to consider what happens in the home. We do have a generation which is not like the generation I grew up under. You have to have parents who stress from the very beginning that this is the way it is. Your children, I don't want to be cliche-ish, they're not your friends. They are your children. You have to lay down, thank you, guidelines, and it's incumbent upon every one of us, even if they're not our children, when you have an opportunity, I know you run the risk maybe of getting shot at times or stabbed, and especially in New York City, you gotta watch yourself. I'm being very serious about it, and in other places too, but we have to go into the school system when it's time to meet with the teachers and ask them what they're doing to encourage our students. And beyond that, again, we have to consider the media. Media and technology has just taken over, and what they see on the screen and what is acceptable, the swearing and so on. I'm not a stick in the mud, but the stuff I see on electronic media, to say TV, etc., movies, and on these phones that everybody has, this is a different generation, and we have to figure out a way to reach them. And one way, again, is to continue to teach, to agitate, as Frederick Douglass said, even if it upsets individuals, just keep doing it, and maybe things will get better.
Thank you. Conference of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History is having an international conference on crisis in Black education in Cincinnati this fall. And I'm pretty sure that we're going to see some innovative ideas on how to enfranchise our children, to make them, it's called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History.
Come up. I think they have two places for them. One of them is for the graveyards, the other one is for the museum. What's your thought about that and how it will affect the next generation? Thank you.
I've been thinking about it, again, especially being involved with Professor Jim McPherson and Civil War history and Fortress Monroe. And let me just say this, I started thinking even harder about it on my way back with my wife, as I said, from the West Coast. We went coast to coast driving. I got very agitated and saddened at the same time as we drove along, I think it's 40, heading back home. This is Sunday again, and I drove past Nathan Bedford Forest State Park. Nathan Bedford Forest State Park, some of you probably seen it. Nathan Bedford Forest was the one who commanded the troops that slaughtered nearly 200 Union soldiers, all of them for the most part, well, 90% of them United States colored troops, in 1864 in the Fort Pillow Massacre. They treated them as fugitive enslaved individuals. They shot them all, killed them. And there were some European, American, Union, Yankee soldiers who were killed as well. And then we also, again, have to consider the following. Contrary, again, I don't want this to be the red herring. Remember, we got to keep our eyes on the prize. As Congressman Scott said as well, and I know that well. Let's keep in mind the other things that have to be taken care of in this country in terms of health care, economic considerations, also immigration issues. There's just so much going on. Possible warfare. I mean, he's not going anywhere. His children aren't going anywhere. I have relatives who'd be going somewhere, etc. However, I don't believe that the statues should be destroyed. I know the one in Durham was pulled down, Robert E. Lee destroyed. I don't believe that they should be defaced at all, definitely not. I believe that they should be removed, as many other individuals do, including the Lee family members, even Jefferson Davis's great-great-grandson, Benjamin Y. Davis, who I've met and talked with before. They need to be placed in historic context, if you will, moved to another area, in a museum if they fit. Many of them won't fit in the museum, in the building. In an area where individuals can go to study that part of the history and those individuals who represented it. You can't erase history. You cannot do that. But I do not want to have to deal with what I've dealt with before on public lands, etc., walking, seeing someone who would have kept me enslaved, and I know they did keep my great-great-grandparents enslaved, and that troubles me greatly. So that's my response. Don't tear it up, don't make a spectacle of things, etc., because someone constructed those too. I'm sensitive at the same time, but move them in the appropriate way.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Yes, question. Yes.
May I respond to that first, though, before you go on to your question? Excuse me. And I just wanted to add, hopefully, some perspective. First, I'm a graduate of Lincoln University, which was the first university to offer higher education to African Americans after the Civil War. But it wasn't, and I graduated in 1966. It wasn't, though, until the 1970s, while a student at Howard University, that while studying, I took a break and went down to the basement and saw these books, these huge books, and wondered what they were about. And when I opened one of the books after dusting off dusting it off, I found it was a ration book for Negro soldiers. That was the first time I learned that blacks fought in the Civil War. Miseducation of the American Negro, Carter G. Woodson. I mentioned that all to say, in attempting to add a little perspective, that to take the statues and destroy them may not be the best idea, but to find an appropriate place for them, i.e. museums, might be appropriate. But along with that, there needs to be some information that addresses not just the glamorous or apparently glamorous side of these generals and soldiers, but something needs to be connected with that to address the atrocities associated with that period of time also. So that people will have a perspective rather than just to glorify some of what much of Unite the Right and other organizations are concerned with.
Okay, we're gonna move it to.
Is the Nation of Islam and the Yaqub theory of the creation of European Americans, and that's part of the late Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I've met with Abdul Halim Farrakhan, I've written about Abdul Halim Farrakhan, sat down and talked with him before, also the late Warathdin Muhammad, etc. But that's something that's part of the Yaqub theory. If you read the autobiography of Malcolm X, you'll find some of that, the invention of white people, albinism, and the like. However, again, that fits into the pseudoscience and apocrypha that we should not be guilty of, with all due respect. However, as you said, we were not voluntary immigrants. We didn't say, hey, I want to go to the new old world. You notice I said new old world? Because this didn't start to exist when this person known as Columbus, who wasn't the first one to the new old world, though many people think he was. No, he wasn't. But again, just keep in mind that the deplorable conditions can't even begin to be described. Dysentery, cholera, diarrhea, rats, feces. I mean, I don't want to make you sick. And sometimes it took as much as 3 months to get from the west coast of Africa. And there was also an East African slave trade. So we need to think about all of that. And yes, we really should be thinking about being our brothers and sisters' keeper. I'm not about oppressing or denigrating any group of people, because we're all created equally. I'm not going to get religious on you, because some of you may not be. You may be atheists or whatever you believe in, that's fine. However, we didn't create it ourselves. Am I correct? Somewhere, yeah, Ashe. Thank you, Minister Gibson. So, you know, I respect what you said, but yes, we were involuntary immigrants, there's no question about it. And when we got here, we weren't treated like the white indentured servants, though some of them were treated pretty badly too. You've got to look at all of the nuances. I try to do that to balance it, but I'm going to tell it like it is every single time. I'm not going to try to skew or get in a position of being that which has oppressed me as a person. I have to maintain my dignity and self-respect and not perpetrate inaccuracies.
Okay.
And I would just add to that yes, there's segregation, whether it's apparent or whether it's not apparent. And I'll just refer back to situations not like yours, but situations where there is real poverty, where we have 13, 14-year-old girls becoming parents who don't know how to parent and who are still children themselves, who have children, who have no models and who have no role models to follow, and who have no opportunity to really move from the poor situation they're in to a situation above that. So yes, because of that kind of situation, yes, there is segregation. And the situation that you have explained really is a problem more associated with middle class folks, not poor folks.
15 seconds or less. There is still residential segregation. It has gotten better. The Brown versus Board of Education Topeka, Kansas decision did not end segregated schools. They reopened the Brown case, in fact, because there was no desegregation. The greatest effort, which was a failure, ultimately was busing, and the reaction to busing. And it is based upon residential status at this point in time. Schools are still basically segregated and based upon where you live. If you live in an area that's integrated in some, you can get better education, etc. And many of the inner city schools, obviously populated by individuals, African American, brown people of color, there's overcrowding as well. And again, the schools are represented based upon, again, the student population, the residential patterns.
Okay.
together and work together on saving our children. That's what we have to do. And
It was primarily an urban study, a sociological study by William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. We have to look at the rural piece of it as well. He didn't get into all of the nuances of it. So it was very case study specific. But thanks for bringing that up, but it wasn't a panacea.
I'm from Philadelphia too.
And so is my wife. Okay, thank you.
It appears that we live in a system that sanctions the destruction of human freedom, and it's talking about mainly our people. And I look at, and I'm thankful that my white brothers and sisters are here today. I am. I'm thankful. And especially the men. You know, normally when you talk about racial issues, white guys get up and, gone. White women, they'll stand and have the conversation. They dare to deal with racial issues. We have to stop being afraid of each other. When we talk about the educational system, our children can't teach what they don't know. Feel me? And when other cultures are going through atrocity, they commit a heinous crime, the first thing society does is psychological backgrounding to see how they grew up, what their family structure was like, the whole nine. Ever since we've been here in this country, we've been beat down, oppressed, ostracized. That's the truth. But still in it, we still forgive. I asked a white friend of mine, I said, do you think, or why is it that whites hate blacks so bad? And the only response he could give me was, Larry, blacks hate whites too. I said, blacks hate a white system that's oppressive. To you personally, they're not talking about you individually. They're talking about a system. I said, I guarantee you, I lay my life on the line. The average black that you go to, if you ask them or tell them that you needed a place to stay or something to eat, the average would feed you. We would, because we're that kind of people. My question is, and I'm looking at the elder, when you're talking about psychologically, our people have been from the beginnings to right now oppressed and have been through psychological and emotional scarring. So we haven't overcome. It's almost like PTSD. We need some help. We need some talk to, some love, and some caring even from other people. Thank you, brother. I appreciate that love. Wait a minute. And then here it is with us, even other races. We need you to stand up even for our cause. When you see that there's atrocities and heinous things being done to another people, and everybody has to stand up and speak out against it. We can't allow it to go on.
I try to keep it to 1 minute. Definitely want to thank everyone for putting this together. It's great. I wish the panel was a little more progressive and not tiptoe as much. But thank you anyway for the job that you're doing. But I think under the system of education that we understand, if there is a problem, if I have a physical problem, physical ailment, and I go to a physician, the first thing he wants to know is, what's your family history of this? He wants to, he's going to go through a list of things and ask me questions based on my history. And he's always going to go back, does your grandmother have a history of this? Does your father have a history of this? Does your mother have a history of this? And I think if we're going to talk about a so-called Negro problem, I say so-called because that's part of the problem. We have no identity. We don't understand, some of the cultural things that we should understand. The Druze went through what they went through, but they came out with their culture. They came out with their identity. Many groups of people go through what they go through, but they come out with an identity. The culture is something to hold on to that anchors them to their beginning. We struggle with even knowing where to go to find that beginning. And so our children...
What is the question? We really need to be courteous to the others. What is the question?
So what can we do to reconnect with our identity, our culture, and our beginning? Thank you.
Okay, I
If you
don't,
keep beating someone down, constantly telling them they're nothing, they're no good, they have no access to things, they start believing it after a while. I'm not going to get into the possible relationship between that and Stockholm Syndrome and things like that. But if you tell someone they're nothing constantly and you treat them that way, and I've been treated that way in many instances, but thank the Lord I've had role models that helped me determine, no, you're just as good and capable as anyone else. You're going to believe that after a while. There's such a thing as brainwashing, and you're right on the money there too. You have to have enough individuals there to mentor, to support you, and you have to know your history.
okay, I just want to say that as far as the matter of equality, we have to reassert that because all men are created equal, and unequal treatment does not equate to inequality as a person or a people. So we have to debunk that and just recognize that I am equal, you know, and so is everyone else here. And the other thing is, you know, when you look at race in America and you look at it from the prism of Black America and all the atrocities and all the studies and all the problems and the ramifications of where we have arrived at today in our communities, and things do need fixing. I mean, and each of us has a personal responsibility toward that. And my daughter-in-law says a child educated in the school system only is an uneducated child. So whatever's lacking in the school system, we in the home fill in those blanks. But the other thing is, you know, I look at, there's been all kinds of studies about the Black experience, but if we're going to fix race in America, we're going to also need to have some studies about why do white people need to feel superior? Because that's the other side of the coin, that there is no dialogue and no studies and no exploration. So you can't look at one side of the problem.
Is there a question, ma'am?
No, that's my comment.
All right, moving on to the next.
Good evening. Real quick question. How vital, even from the film that we just were able to watch, how vital do you think it is that arts actually play a role in the history, whether we express it, take a look back, or even looking forward? How vital do you think art is when it comes to, I guess, the racial struggle or the racial tension that we have?
I think art's very vital. Again, my high school buddy, Arturo Lindsay, an artist, he's going to have a show in October. He's going to have one in November. He does a lot of cultural and intercultural art, and again, creativity. Again, I know what you're getting at. You have to have positive images, etc. And art can use art to do that as well.
Okay, next.
So ready to turn out the lights. So last question.
Okay, my question is on the education piece. We all know that the Hidden Figures are coming out now. So I could care less about some of that history, okay? Because a lot of it was lies that we were taught. I did a project on Robert E. Lee. Yeah, I thought he was this good man or whatever. But what I'm saying is, even with the education piece in place for our children now, like the lady stated, it's segregated because of where you live. And even with the kids in the militaries, a lot of them are still not meeting the education piece. They're not teaching them to get ready for the work world, to be able to support themselves and their families. And I think that's something that should be addressed. And the minimum wage. You cannot take a mother with 5 children and train her for a minimum wage job. It's just not going to happen.
Okay, ma'am, let me respond to that by saying, one, I believe that the problem is not education in the schools. At this point, the bigger problem is self-concept of infants, young children, as they emerge out of their homes as a result of the kind of caretaking that they receive, which is a humongous problem in many, many situations, especially as it pertains to young and impoverished people. So that is an area where positive self-concept and beliefs are going to be extremely important as a child then develops with regard to what he or she can believe, achieve, and be able to succeed with regard to themselves and society.
Thank you very much. Brother Pearson, you want to close it on? On behalf of Project 1619, Brother Calvin Pearson, all of the members of the board and all of the members of the audience, we really greatly appreciate you spending your evening, Friday with us, and may we all work together to have concern for our brothers and sisters. We are our keepers, and be blessed, be safe as you head home. Thank you very much.